Hello, welcome to all of you. This is the third climate policy session of the State of the Union Conference. And today we have a very special guest. We have the first Vice President of the European Commission, Frans Timmermans, with us. And he will be interviewed by Mrs. Pilita Clark, who is journalist by the Financial Times. We attach a lot of importance to your input. And so there are questions that you can raise with us in the chat box, and they will be transmitted to Mr. Timmermans. And there is also there are three poll questions that are up for your input. And please participate in the poll, because it's very important to bring them to the attention of Mr. Timmermans, your views today in the conference. Now, let me give three elements of the discussion today. The first is that the EU has decided to become the first continent in the world to become climate neutral. That was in 2019, has been followed by China, by the United States, and by a raft of some 60 countries. So that leadership has to be complemented, and that leadership was real. There were real followers for the leadership shown by the European Union. Now, we all know, second point, that that target is very challenging. It will require a raft of policies in order to drive the low carbon innovation and the low carbon investment that we need massively. And I think that is what the impact assessment of the European Commission is showing. We are talking here big numbers. Now, in view of that, the EU will have to deliver on a raft of policy measures. And one of the questions I'm bothering with is that, all the questions will have to be delivered, all the policy instruments will have to be delivered up to their maximum. What if one or the other may run into difficulties? Yesterday, we had a panel on the trade and climate question, and in particular on the carbon border adjustment mechanism. And the 2023 deadline was considered very early by many of the participants in the panel. So that is a question that I certainly would like to advance to Mr. Timmermans. What if we run into difficulties or into delays, significant delays on one or the other instrument? But without much further ado, I would like to hand over the microphone to Pilita Clark. I wish you all a very interesting session, and please do come forward with your questions to Mr. Timmermans, and do answer the poll questions to take stock of where we are today on the 7th of May, of a couple of weeks before the Fit for 55 package is going to appear on the table by the European Commission. So Pilita, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Jos, and welcome, Mr. Timmermans. Great pleasure to be here today. And I do hope that everybody will not only ask questions, because there are so many to ask about this very interesting topic, but also very interested to see what people's responses are to the polls that Jos just mentioned. In particular, we have one that asks about the EU's pledge to cut emissions 55% by 2030, or at least 55% by 2030. And we're asking people if they think that that pledge will be met A, ahead of time, B, on time, C, not met at all. Now, Mr. Timmermans, I know you're going to tell me that it's going to be met on time, correct?
That's right. Yes.
Okay. Now, what I'm very curious to know, though, is how that's going to happen, given that it took the EU nearly 30 years to cut emissions by about 23% from 1990. Now, this target is envisaging a 55% cut at least in the space of really 9 years. How is that going to happen?
Well, the good thing is we analysed that, and we did an impact assessment, so we can prove, at least on paper, that it is feasible. But I also want to refer to what Jos said earlier. We will have surprises along the way. This is not something that will go mechanically. If you look back over the past couple of years, I remember even my own services, not even 2 years ago, a year and a half ago perhaps, was saying the car industry will never make the emission norms for 2021. We will have to impose massive fines, and then the member states will force us to abolish those fines, and all of our policy will go down the drain. Well, they met the targets. I remember car companies saying not so long ago, electric vehicles, yes, nice for the longer future, but we will make even better internal combustion engines, etc., etc. That's gone. It's gone. I mean, some things go much faster than we anticipate, and some things will be slower. And we need to adapt.
What do you think will be slower? Tell us what you think the main problem.
Well, the thing is that's quite unpredictable. If you look, another example, the International Energy Agency, consistently, and that's a very good organization, very professional, but they consistently underestimated the price development of renewable energy over the years. We were at every time surprised by the fact that it became cheaper and cheaper. And offshore wind hardly needs subsidies these days anymore. Who would have thought that a couple of years ago? But in other areas, some issues will be difficult because they depend on the behavior of other partners. What will happen, for instance, in the steel industry is a bit unpredictable. I'm quite optimistic, but I might be proven wrong. So I think we need to be modest in making assumptions. We need to be firm in making our plans, and we need to convince ourselves that we also need to be flexible in adapting to disappointments, or in adapting when things go faster than we thought they would.
Yeah. Okay, well, I mean, that's fair enough. Now, the Commission is due to bring out a package, quite a complex package of proposals by June, correct? So that'll just spell out how you plan to actually meet this. Now, there are already rumours that June deadline could slip to July. Are those rumours correct?
Well, yeah, it's going to be the 14th of July, to be very precise. That's 14 juillet will be the day that we come out with our plans.
Oh, really? Okay. All right. Well, let's hope it is. Do you think that deadline could slip though? Because it's going to be difficult, correct?
No, it's not. It's not going to be difficult to make the deadline. The reason is we were still doing a number of impact assessments, and the Regulatory Scrutiny Board still had to look at them. And so we had the choice of either splitting up the package and coming with some earlier and some later, or waiting a bit longer and then do the whole package. I chose to do the latter. Why? Because the package is such that some member states will balk at one issue, others will be disappointed by another issue. We need the package to show that this is fair on everyone, even though parts of it you don't like. So the package should be approached as a whole, and not picked apart in individual measures. That's why I prefer waiting a couple of weeks longer so that we can present the package as a whole.
Okay. I want to ask you about one measure that was tried in the 1990s repeatedly, actually, and failed, and that's a carbon tax. Not the ETS, not the emissions trading system that we've had very successfully and actually super successfully recently, which I want to ask you about in a minute. But a carbon tax, and which a lot of people always felt was going to be a better policy measure than an emissions trading scheme. Is it actually time now to put something as radical as that back onto the agenda?
Well, some member states have put it on the agenda nationally. I would argue that our emissions trading system has proven very resilient, and that it still has a lot of room to improvement. We can enlarge it to new areas. We're studying that, whether we can apply it to transport and to housing, or the built environment more generally, of course. We can make it stricter. We can apply to other industries. We can reduce the amounts of free allowances. We have to specifically look very carefully at the maritime sector, at airlines. So we have a lot of work to do. And the ETS is a proven system. If you look at the price development in the last weeks, we're at 50 euros a ton right now. And I think part of that is because the market is anticipating the proposals we will be coming with. Yeah. What will other global players do? Will the Americans who have sort of regional ETS systems, will they do the same? I think they're still making up their minds. They might follow us. The Chinese are also considering developing this system. So it does have sort of an increasing global attractiveness. And I think if that works well, you would not need specifically to explore too much the issue of a carbon tax. Because in fact, this is a carbon tax.
Sure. So in other words, we should expect to see the ETS, the emissions trading system, expanded rather than a new EU-wide system of carbon pricing of any sort.
Yes, yes. But at the same time, there is also other legislation about, for instance, energy performance of buildings, the transition to renewable energy, we look at the Renewable Energy Directive, et cetera, and those, of course, also have implicit fiscal consequences because they have a price effect.
Yeah. Just to let you know, I don't know if you can see the screen, but my colleagues have been telling me that there's some skepticism about whether the targets are going to be met. The 55% target a few minutes ago, only 11% thought that the targets would be met ahead of time. 37% thought reached on time. I'm afraid 52% thought wouldn't be met at all. But anyway, we've got time to change that vote, and you've got time to persuade people otherwise now.
I love skepticism because it always leads to smiles when you deliver what people don't expect you to deliver.
Very good. Now, you mentioned then that the carbon price in the emissions trading scheme has just this week gone above 50 euros a tonne, which is certainly not something that a lot of people would have been expecting not that many years ago. Is that a good price in your mind? Is it too high? And what is too high?
Well, it's a market. So who am I to say what's too high or too low? It's a market mechanism. But if we want to achieve our goals, I think the price should be much higher than it is even at 50 euros. But that's up to the market. And I think, if you look at the effect it has had on industries, reducing their emissions by 35%, that's quite impressive. And I'm not just looking at the price and the tradability of the rights, but especially on the effects in transforming the emissions of industries. I think it's working pretty well. But all indications are, if I base myself on science, that for it to be really effective in the long run, the price needs to be a lot higher.
Right, that's right. I mean, it is a market mechanism, but in another sense, it's not entirely, because you can influence it. The Commission can influence it by this package of measures that you bring forward will, in fact, as you said earlier, yes, lead participants to think, I better be buying up now while I can, which is possibly what's happening right now, as you mentioned. So it's not entirely a free market, as it were. I mean, it is heavily influenced by policy.
But I honestly believe there is no such thing as a free market, because any economic activity is sort of framed within legislative boundaries set by authorities, whether they're national, European, or international. So in that sense, the thing is, you influence the behavior of markets, but you don't control the markets. It's not a guided system. It's not a communist system. It's using the strength of the free market to make the transformation happen. And by the way, this is what we see across the board. Look at the financial markets, look at banking systems, look at insurance companies who are really, really now looking at us to help them understand what adaptation means or mitigation means and what that means for their business. Yeah. The whole discussion that's going on worldwide about potentially having stranded assets and how to prevent them in light of the climate crisis. I mean, things are changing so profoundly right now, and I think sometimes we underestimate the pace of change and also the depth of change.
Yeah. Let me put a question to you that's just come in from our audience here about the ETS. And the questioner is saying that the emissions trading system has been successful at managing many carbon-heavy industries, but the aviation industry continues to grow their emissions at an unsustainable rate. Has the EU looked at implementing a jet fuel tax to fund green technologies for the aviation sector specifically?
Well, I have campaigned in the electoral campaign strongly on the kerosene tax. Because, also in our relationship with our citizens, when they fill up their car with gasoline, they pay tax. When they take a train or a bus, the energy that's used to move them around is taxed. And there's only one area where there's no tax, and that's in aviation. I think that's unsustainable in all sorts of meanings. But what has always been the escape? It's an international market. We have competitors. We will no longer be able to survive. And you have Turkey and you have the Gulf, etc. But now that internationally more and more nations are reaching the same conclusion about the seriousness of the climate crisis and I need to do something about it, it creates a situation where perhaps with the Americans, with the Chinese, and a couple of others, we could start honestly thinking about pricing aviation. And again, I repeat, I think a kerosene tax would make a lot of sense. But if that's not possible, there are other ways of putting a price on the impact on our climate by aviation. And in general, the transport sector is one sector where we've seen an increase of emissions, one of the very few sectors. So we really need to tackle that. And I know how difficult it's going to be.
But just going back to the 55% target, I mean, is it possible then that the Commission would be looking at something like a jet fuel tax in its package of measures that are coming forward?
Again, we're now looking at how we can bring aviation more under the ETS system, which is also, of course, a way of taxing. And we need to build international coalitions to make that happen. We can do things in the EU. We can also do things sort of that would apply to those who want to fly into the EU or fly from the EU. We can do all of that. But my preference now, given the change in the international climate, sorry, no pun intended, in the international surroundings with the Americans coming back, etc., I think we have an opportunity to try and push the envelope also in the international scene.
Yeah, I know. And I do want to get onto the Americans and the very interesting summit that Mr. Biden organised last month. But just going back to the, excuse me, the ETS price, the carbon price in the ETS going above 50 euros a tonne. As it's been climbing, that price, we've heard louder and louder calls from heavy industry groups and companies in the EU, particularly steel companies, saying, we really want to see this carbon border adjustment mechanism, or as we call it at the Financial Times, a carbon border tax to level the playing field so that we're not being outdone by our competitors. Now, can you tell us where that's up to now? You're due to unveil proposals soon, and it's due to come in around 2023. Is that still pretty much the deadline and the timetable? Right.
Well, yeah. The thing is, we call it Cband, by the way. I have the impression Cband is becoming something of a catchword. But anyway, we'll see.
I think in Brussels, I'm not sure. But anyway, it could well work out.
Well, one of the first things I get asked whenever I speak to Mr. Xie, who's my Chinese counterpart, or John Kerry, who's my American counterpart, always the first word I hear is Cband. So
then they don't have to say that horrible tax word, I suppose.
So, but to answer your question, we will make the proposal in July, and then it's up to co-legislators. But usually in Europe, it would then take about a year and a half, 2 years. In that interim period, it's not just a matter of negotiating between the co-legislators. It's also the possibility of our international partners to analyze the potential impact of a Cband and perhaps, hopefully, take measures that would allow us not to impose the Cband. That's my hope. And I have this, this careful impression, step by step, in my contacts, especially with the United States and John Kerry, that the initial reaction is was very negative to Cband, but then they also start analyzing their own needs potentially in this area, but especially the dynamic of the negotiation in the years between the proposal being put on the table and it potentially being adopted.
Right. Interesting. So now you're right. I mean, Mr. Kerry obviously was very wary about it in public comments. I suspect in private comments, he might have been even more direct, and possibly Xie Zhenhua as well from China, his counterpart. I mean, what can you give us a flavour of the sorts of concerns that you're hearing from your counterparts abroad about Cband?
What I want to say, first of all, my direct counterparts, Mr. Xie and Mr. Kerry, we have a very frank and open relationship, and it starts all three of us being profoundly convinced of the urgency of the climate crisis and of the already devastating effect of the climate change that has occurred and is occurring. So that is a good starting position. We intellectually and politically understand the urgency of our jobs. And that really, really helps. But they have questions about this, and we exchange. Just basically what I told you is how we talk about it. When I meet other ministers, I've spoken to a host of ministers from Japan. I recently also spoke to a minister from Korea. I get questions from Canada. I get questions from Turkey, from all sorts of places. I always, try and indicate that they should also see this as an opportunity for their industries and their climate policy, because they all more or less commit to carbon neutrality, is mostly what they say, by the middle of the century. Well, if you commit to that, you have to start cracking. You have to start doing things now. And if you unlevel the playing field, it is logical that we will take measures to avoid carbon leakage. But if you keep the playing field more or less level, then of course the need to impose measures at the borders will decrease.
Yeah. Now, I know you haven't unveiled all the proposals, but hypothetically speaking, if you're a country like Canada that has a carbon pricing system in place, does that logically that would suggest to onlookers like me that the EU might exempt them from any border levies, correct?
Well, the system works as follows. We look at industries very specifically, make an analysis, and then specifically look also at our partner countries across the world, and then see, is there a level playing field? Are they taking measures to implement the Paris agreements they signed and ratified? Yes or no? And if they're taking the measures, then of course the rationale for Cband disappears. If they're not taking measures, there is a rationale for Cband, and I would even argue a WTO WTO compatible rationale for Cband, because they are just not following up on their international commitment to follow the Paris Agreement.
Yeah, okay. And what about least developed countries, emerging economies?
Well, we need. I mean, it's very clear. The historic responsibility of where we are rests on the shoulders of the industrialized world. We are the emitters; they're not the emitters. And the last thing I want to do is Europe to go to developing countries and say, "Hang on, you can't emit because we made such a mess of it. Too bad for you." That's impossible. Even more so, the faster we can help them develop their economies and their energy systems into a sustainable energy system, the better we're all off, because their economies will grow faster, better markets for us, et cetera, more stability, more education possibilities for this huge young population they have. And we need to help them to leapfrog energy resourcing. We're talking about changing our electricity system. They're mostly talking about creating an electricity system, and we need to take that responsibility very seriously. That's why for Glasgow, the industrialized world should be more serious about putting the necessary money on the table for adaptation and mitigation. I think we've pledged 100 billion. We've never made the 100 billion. It should now be on the table, because otherwise I fear that the disappointment in the developing countries might make it more difficult to even reach an agreement in Glasgow. Yeah.
And by Glasgow, of course, you mean COP26, the
next
big UN climate talks, which are... Now, I just want to tell you the results of another poll that we had on the carbon border adjustment mechanism, when we asked people if they thought it would help to create a meaningful global carbon price. 76% said yes, they thought that it would. Only 24% thought it would ignite a dangerous round of trade conflict. So that's really incredibly interesting, I think. And really, that's always been the hope of environmental groups, that if the EU, an economy or a region as large as the EU, ever brought in a measure like this, then it could actually start to create something like a global carbon price. I mean, can you imagine that actually happening, say, in the next 10 years or even your lifetime?
I don't know how much life you think I still have in me, but I hope that I can still witness, even at very old age, that we reach climate neutrality. I'll be 90 years old almost, but who knows? Who knows? But the beauty of it is, let me say this: the beauty of this is, we're doing this finally, like my grandparents. My grandparents. They met poverty in the 1930s. They went through a Second World War, and then they put their shoulders under a recovery, knowing that they would not really profit from it, but their kids would. And that made them really work even harder. And I wish we could rekindle as a society that feeling for once that we're now doing something for our kids and grandkids, even if it takes a lot of effort out of us. Because one of the, sorry to make this argument, I think it's important. One of the effects of the after-war generation, my parents' generation, is that my grandparents taught them as a generation, now you should, reap what we've sown. You should be the ones reaping this. And that's how, baby boomers see the world. We're reaping. But now we need to convince baby boomers, hang on, you should think about how our grandparents thought about this and what they need to do. And that's what we need to do for our children. And I think this is a possibility we can really realize. And I think it gives me a great feeling to do something that perhaps I will not profit from, but my kids will.
Yeah, I mean, just on that point, there was another terrifically interesting move this week in Germany, where Europe's largest economy has brought forward its climate targets because the country's top court said that basically the existing goals were going to place too high a burden on younger generations. It's super interesting. But can you see that happening in any other countries?
Well, we've seen some of that in other countries. There's a court ruling in my own country, in the Netherlands, along the same lines. The Conseil d'État in France has ruled also along the same lines. And there's a double whammy here. There's the burden of the climate crisis, but there's also the potential burden of the incredible amount of money we're taking out now to recover from COVID. If we spend that in the old economy, and don't invest it in the new economy, we will put so much debt and unsustainable debt on the shoulders of our children. I don't want that responsibility. So there's here a double responsibility. First of all, to accelerate the transition to a sustainable society, but also to invest in economic recovery that is completely in sync with that sustainable society. So, I cannot overstate the importance of the next couple of years. If we make big mistakes in the next couple of years, I dread to think about what this will do to our children. And although not everybody likes my saying this, I keep saying if we don't fix it now, our children will wage wars over water and over food. I have no doubt about that.
Yeah. I just want to get to a few questions that have been coming through. One that I actually was going to ask you myself, so I'm going to ask this one. Is there a chance that the Chinese would move enough to not be subject to carbon border adjustment mechanism by 2023?
Look, China is a different place than Europe, also in terms of politics. Now politics is done, etc. But I think President Xi's position on reaching carbon neutrality in 2060 is real. It's not just a gimmick. It's not just propaganda. He means it. And we sense it when we talk to the Chinese that this is trickling down in the system and they're looking for ways to achieve it. Now, of course, we need to see that reflected in the 5-year plans. We need to see that reflected in their international investment decisions so that they stop investing in coal-fired power generation. And then we need to see it in their commitment to when they're going to peak out in terms of their emissions and when they're going to change their their power generation mix. But they move in different ways than we do, but they can move fast. But
they just brought out their latest 5-year plan, and to the disappointment of many people, there was nothing in there to suggest that they were going to be reining in dramatically on coal in the near term.
Yes, but things can change pretty quickly in China. I think the system is still coming to terms with the consequences of what the President Xi has announced. And we will keep pushing them. And in that context, it is possible that we would not have to apply a Cband on China. It is possible, but it is also possible that we do. I mean, this is something that will depend on steps taken in the next couple of years. And don't get me wrong. I mean, the Chinese aren't doing this, will not be doing this to do us a favor. They're doing this because it's in their own interest. They have huge environmental challenges. And since they are more and more concentrating on domestic demand, not just on exports, domestic demand under the present circumstances will create an unlivable society, especially in the city. So they will have to change. And by the way, the global economy is moving in that direction. And you have to be part of that if you want to be and remain a superpower in the future. Yeah. You would have to adopt the new economy. You can't stick with the old.
Right. But just to be clear, with the current policies, although they've got a 2060 climate neutrality target, and of course they're a green technology giant and have been for some time, and they have been piloting and starting to roll out a carbon pricing system of their own. As things stand, though, with their use of coal and their continuing financing of coal overseas, that would have to mean that it would be unfair for them not to be subject to a Cband, to a carbon border tax.
Well, as I said before, it will depend. What will they do? They've given some indications to different people about reducing or even stopping with financing of coal-fired power generation internationally. That will make a difference. We're waiting to hear from them whether they could peak out in 2025. I think they've been floating 2030, but that would make things much more difficult. If they can do that sooner, that would be helpful. And also their own energy mix. And they're seriously considering that, seriously investing in creating cleaner energy. If they do take these measures in the next couple of years, then Cband might not be necessary, but it's still on the table, and I absolutely don't exclude that we have to apply it.
Okay. And you're still looking at just a limited number of goods: steel, cement, power generation.
But it is technically extremely complicated. It's an extremely complicated measure, Cband. And I'm fortunate enough to have some of the best people in the world working for us, devising that system. We have really, really very good people in the European Commission working on that, but still it is complicated. And we cannot afford to get it wrong. If we get it wrong, and it is not seen as what it is, but it's seen as sort of a levy to increase your income or a protectionist measure, we will be slapped down immediately by WTO and our international trading partners. So we need to get this right. We cannot afford to get it wrong.
Yeah. Okay, just going back to President Biden, who had this large, elaborate leaders summit last month. Some very interesting pledges made there, not least by the US itself, which is also planning now to roughly halve its emissions by 2030, but from a different baseline to the EU. What did you make of the summit?
Well, I mean, who would have deemed that possible a year ago? It's the US is back, and that's very good news. And you see that, the interesting things sometimes are not the biggest things. The interesting things that I find interesting is that because of a change of position in the US and radically embracing the need to create a sustainable society, also people like Bolsonaro all of a sudden change track. They don't have somebody in the White House who tells them that there is no climate crisis, that it's all, and that there's no thing more beautiful than coal. That's changed, and it has a huge impact on everyone. And if you think about this incredibly challenging event, which will be the COP in Glasgow, the Americans leading here again does help also convince the Chinese that they can't stay behind, because like in Paris, I'm absolutely sure the Chinese will not want to be seen as outliers, will not want to be seen as standing on the sidelines. They will want to be the architects of a success. And the Americans are making that more possible. Of course, we have other issues with China, serious issues with China in other areas, but here perhaps we could still, come to a same position that will help the world advance in the right direction.
Okay, well, just on COP26, what are your expectations in the run-up to that summit in November? What do you think it's going to be able to achieve realistically?
There's still an incredible amount of work to be done. I hope we don't spend too much time on what I would call the leftovers of Madrid. which is the Article 6 discussion, as you know, but we need to solve that. But I hope that will not be the main course of the event. I hope we will see some improved NDCs, national determined contributions from the industrialized world. I think it is essential that we show solidarity with the Pacific and with Africa on the issue of mitigation and adaptation, which will include also technology transfers and other things that will make it possible for them to sort of leapfrog their energy generation. I hope we will see a meeting of minds between the United States, the European Union, and China. And I think the United Kingdom could be helpful there in bringing it about at the conference. I also know this is not going to be easy, but I think it is still possible. So these are some of the things I hope we can achieve.
Well, sorry, when you say a meeting of minds between the EU, China, and the US.
Well, that we see eye to eye, that we do need to have improved NDCs, that we do need to have, because with all the wonderful things President Biden has said, I thought he was a bit cautious or silent actually on financing of our international commitments. So I hope we can understand as industrialized world that we have to take a responsibility for the industrializing world. Also because this will help put an end to the situation that China can present itself as part of the industrializing world. I think that is incredibly important.
Yeah, and if there's no agreement on, at the very least, mobilizing that 100 billion a year that was supposed to be enforced by 2020 as part of these talks, from wealthier to poorer countries to help them deal with climate change, manage and tackle it. If that doesn't occur, you know, some countries are already talking about walking out and you know, just as does happen at these summits, it has to be said, almost every time they're held. But still, I mean, there will be tremendous disappointment and tension, and it's hard to see that it can be a success unless that happens. But as you say, we're not really seeing much sign of that money coming forward yet.
Well, I think, you know, I have to say this, obviously, the European Union did take its responsibility. We're the major donor here. And I still think the EU should be doing more, by the way, anyway. But I will not be able to convince member states and even my colleagues in the college to do more if others don't even do a significant contribution. So it all starts with a broad commitment to this. And I can't blame, African countries or Pacific countries for being disappointed if we don't follow up on our commitments. You know, the consequences they are already facing of the climate crisis. You know, we are facing droughts and we're facing wildfires and we're facing unpredictable weather. But, you know, what they're facing is already a lot worse under the conditions they're in. And I think they deserve a strong commitment from the international community. They did not create this crisis, let's be clear.
Yeah, just sticking with that subject of climate finance, the UK, which is obviously hosting COP26, has been a generous contributor and is saying that it's going to protect its contributions. However, it is also cutting its aid budget, which has caused all sorts of distress in some quarters, and some people are suggesting that could affect the outcome of the COP26 meeting. Do you think, are you detecting any signs of that at all?
Well, I've heard a lot of that. But that's for the British government to explain or to work on. What I can say is that I enjoy working with the COP president, Alok Sharma, and his team. They're very competent and they're very committed. And so I hope they can get us where we need to be, which is going to be challenging. Also because, you know, we don't even know to what extent we can have physical meetings. I think in this case, physical meetings are essential because you were talking about the developing world earlier, many of those countries are wary about virtual meetings because they're wary that they with the limited technical capacities they have, they would not be able to have a full-fledged role there. And I understand that. We'll support them on all of this, but I would, oh my God, I really need physical meetings. We need to sit down at the table, look each other in the eye, and then talk very concretely about what needs to be done. And Alok Sharma's doing a great job. He's traveling around the world, talking to everyone. I think as soon as we can, we should be already now be traveling and preparing well. We should also use other formats to prepare well for this, the G7, the G20, the United Nations General Assembly in September. So there should be a momentum leading up to a potential conclusion in November in Glasgow.
Yeah. I mean, what do you think about the idea of having a sort of hybrid COP where some people are there in person and others are having to dial in from home? Do you think that could work?
I mean, it's a fallback option, but certainly not my preference. But, you know, we've all become experts in this sort of meeting. But, you know, I'll give you my personal experience. I went to see Alok Sharma last week, and we really went through everything. We sat down for 4 hours and went and then some a bite to eat was brought in so we could continue, etc. We can't do this online for 4 hours. That's just physically almost impossible.
We don't know what sort of shape our brains would be in at the end of it.
And on top of that, you know, this is all also about, you know, can I trust her and him? And to build trust, you need to be in physical presence. We can hardly read non-verbal expressions on the screens. You know, I've been in diplomacy for over 30 years. I'm a negotiator by trade. And, you know, the secret of the trade is building personal relationships. The secret of the trade is knowing the other person's position better than your own. That's the secret of the trade of negotiation. And you can't do that. It's the subtle things, the involuntary reactions when you talk, the looks in a delegation. I don't want to reveal my hand here, how we do this, but I mean, people will understand. That's how you negotiate. And given the fact that this is such a crucial negotiation, and it's going to be on a knife's edge, you know, it's certainly not assured that we will have a positive conclusion in Glasgow. Far from it. So if we want that to succeed, we need to be able to sit down, and also at the absolute highest levels, because at the end of the day, some really difficult nuts will have to be cracked, and that has to be done by the leaders themselves.
Yeah. So I mean, you know, don't want to be too gloomy, but, you know, when you look at India and you look at the spread of highly transmissible variants of the virus in other countries, you know, there are people who think that we might have to have another delay. The COP has already been delayed by 1 year. But there are people who are so concerned about those problems that you just mentioned, about the difficulty of not being able to sit down in one room together, that they think it should be delayed for another year. You know, if that happened, would it be a disaster, do you think? Or would it, in fact, be a better thing to happen?
No, I think it would be. The thing is, look at what's happening with our climate. We just can't afford to lose more time. We really can't. Okay. You know, I'm really, really, really worried. And by the way, on a more positive note, I think, you know, the pace of vaccination is going to grow exponentially worldwide now. And so I still have hope that by November we will have forms of vaccination-induced group immunities that will allow us to travel. That is still my assumption, frankly.
Yeah. We've got a couple of questions that have asked about Poland, actually. And I'll just read out one that we've received in relation to the ETS. And the question is, in light of the fast increase in the emissions trading scheme price, Poland has asked the Commission to intervene in the market. What is the Commission's level of appetite for intervention? And are you, in fact, receiving calls from other countries in the EU to intervene as well?
Well, as we discussed before, I believe it's a market and we should be very, very careful not to intervene. because that would create a non-market-based price, and that would absolutely undermine the credibility of the emissions trading system. I think, everybody's afraid of a fundamental transition. And the more you depend on coal, the more you depend on heavy industry, the bigger your fear is. I understand that. But the flip side of that is, the more you have industry, the more you need to transit, the higher your potential is. Poland's potential is being completely underestimated. They have a high engineer density. They have incredibly high levels of engineering education. They have the infrastructure to embrace the circular economy, to go into the new industries. They have the experience over the last 40 years of transformation, successful transformation. Of course, there is a genuine problem there. If you still depend 75% in energy generation on coal, of course, there's a huge problem. But, even from an economic perspective, there's absolutely no future in coal, apart from the devastating effect on air quality, which concerns all Polish citizens. We lose 400,000 Europeans every year die prematurely because of bad air quality, and we can do something about this. But economically, there is no market for coal. The parts of the Polish energy system that relies on coal buys coal in Russia, and at the same time, the coal is piling up in Poland that they're getting out of their mines. And I think they should be preparing the coal mining regions for transition rather than keeping them locked into coal for a longer period of time. And I will be discussing this with the Polish minister actually today, this afternoon.
Okay. I mean, going from 75% down to virtually nothing, not in the space of 10 years necessarily, but it's pretty soon anyway. It's quite an ask, isn't it?
Yeah, but at the same time, if you look at the amount of money Poland is getting out of EU funds, it's more than a quarter of their GDP. Can you imagine that? Of that big country. So they get a huge opportunity to use that wisely in this transition. And I made the case to the EU ambassadors earlier this week when people are gloomy. The one thing the EU does well, and I have personal experience, I was trained as a soldier in the Cold War to fight countries that are now members of the European Union. The one thing we did well in the last 40 years is transform economies and societies to become equal partners to Western societies. If you look at the growth figures and sustainable growth figures we've had in Central and Eastern Europe, if you look at the way already parts of society and the energy sector were cleaned up with European support, it's quite phenomenal. And there's no reason to think we can't do this also in this transformation. Yeah. And by the way, in a spirit of being completely honest, it's solidarity with the East, but it's also in light of self-interest. The more they grow, the better it is for export markets and for the growth of the EU economy as a whole. So, the Western countries did this for their own stability, to avoid conflict, to avoid societies collapsing, but also to create new markets. And it's an incredible success. We sometimes we tend to forget our successes.
Absolutely. We are fast running out of time. I just want to very quickly read out a question and a statement from someone who says that you spoke about doing something for children, but how is the Commission including children in the decision-making process? Because the writer is a young person who says, I'm angry that the crisis hurts us the most, but we don't even have a seat at the table. When I'm your age, it'll be 2058. In other words, too late. And I just will warn you, we have about a minute left. So
well, first of all, there would not be a European Green Deal without the Fridays for Future. I campaigned, it was a lonely place. Jos will remember, I was the only one campaigning for a Green Deal in the European elections. And lo and behold, public reacted to that very strongly, and all parties are now on the same line. And that's thanks to young people. Secondly, it's about time member states, and sorry for being very political, it's about time member states would introduce voting at 16. voting age should be lowered to 16 because we're deciding now about their future. And it's nothing I can do at the European Commission. I campaigned for it, but it's nothing we can do at the European Commission for that. That's a national competence, but that's where it should start. And thirdly, as I said in my first remark, please don't underestimate your influence. Your influence is huge already now, but will increase if you have the courage just to take over the institutions. Young people should not be shy and should understand that they can push old geezers like myself out if they so wish and take the reins. And I hope they do so rather sooner than later.
Well, that is a very fine sentence to end on. Thank you very much, Mr. Timmermans. It's been a great pleasure to speak with you, and I'll hand back now to Jos.
Thank you, Pilita. Thank you, Mr. Timmermans, for this fascinating discussion. We have a challenging target, but you have shown a determination to go for the policies that are required to deliver on that target, and that's very, good as a feeling. We are looking forward to le 14 juillet, because that's going to be the big day. And I'm also heartened to hear from you, Mr. Timmermans, that your diplomatic efforts with China, with United States, and with many partners in our neighborhood and beyond are part of your daily conversations, because that's very important. And on the Cband, inter alia, there is a lot to be explained, but also on the finance. And I think, I'm working, also for European Investment Bank, who has been doing a great job, I think, to put climate on the table. But in the international, dimension, the EIB as a development bank and as a sustainable development bank, I think there is a lot to be taken from your wise words today. So thank you very much. Thank you, Pilita.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Timmermans, and see you soon. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.